Welcome to our first episode. This is the Invite Podcast, and we are getting started. This is new to us, so you can any audience that's either listening or watching can certainly tell that this is not at all AI generated because I'm sure there would be a lot of things cut out in the meantime in the background. So I am co-hosting this. I'm Beth Young, and I will let Troy introduce himself.
Yeah, as Beth said, my name is Troy. We're thrilled to be here. I think today we're just going to kind of give you some idea of how this came to be and why we decided to do it. So we thought this might make sense before we delved into having guests in following episodes.
Okay. So the whole idea behind the title of the invite and kind of putting it on the platform can be answered in a couple ways. The title of the invite and then the desire behind all of it comes from this notion that life sort of hands us these opportunities that we say yes to, or we kind of shelve and set to the side. You'll hear Troy's take on it too. But what got me really interested in this particular topic is how often I go to bed at the end of the day with great ideas, or I wake up with a great motivation to try something. And just as the day goes on, or as the month goes, then there's a year that goes by. And I remember maybe that little nudge or that little opportunity that I might have had when I was younger. It just set aside because it's easier to play it safe than it is to jump in. Yet, as now I've kind of lived a life 1.0, done it, kind of ran through the American checklist, the great American dream checklist. It's like here I show up at this part of life and I'm like ready to take the risk and ask some questions about how did other people take that risk and what got them over the particular hump, if you so to speak, to build something new, create something new, say yes to something, essentially open that invite that life gave them. So, from kind of my perspective, that's a lot of what is encouraging me to do this specifically around that topic of the invite. But, and I know it's similar to you, Troy, but you have your own way of thinking about it too.
Yeah, I think that your take on it is probably, I suppose, a little bit more optimistic than mine. For me, we've known each other a while, and Um, I, I went through a life 1.0 too, and have a different perspective on things. But to me, it seems like when you look at people throughout, certainly our country and really I think the world in general. Most of my experiences here in the U.S., but I think most people are like if you ask them to rate like how's your life going, and they were being honest, they'd probably most people I think would say like a 5 or a 6. And I think it's because what we orient towards. You mentioned kind of the American checklist, if you will. It's kind of like, get the college degree, go find a job, make money, buy a house, get married, have some kids, that kind of thing. And I think there are a lot of people that wind up later in life, be it their 30s, 40s, even 50s, who did all that, followed all that, and probably ignored some invites along the way, probably some sort of little nagging or calling that uh, was really urging them to maybe try something different. And as you said, they played it safe. It's kind of like, no, I'm on a good path. I've got a good career. I'm putting X amount of dollars into my 401k. I should be able to retire by the time I'm 56 or whatever the case may be. And you reach whatever that milepost is, or there's some other event that happens in life, be it, maybe parents get sick or a divorce or something of that nature, a kid gets sick. And suddenly you realize that you've been kind of ignoring these invites or at least putting them in the parking lot because you were taking the path you were supposed to take, and you've reached what you thought was the destination, and you realize you're really not all that happy. Um, and then my hope, the podcast is going to be interviewing guests from all walks of life and kind of understanding like, how did you come to step out on the ledge and take that risk? Like, what made you decide to leave whatever it was behind and go on and do something new, right? Um, I think you shared with me a great quote the other day. I can't remember who it was from, but you said something along the lines of this person said, "The unknown has never let me down."
Mhm.
Yet it's amazing how continually, I think everybody can identify with this idea of the invite, these ideas that pop into our head. Um, and my hope is everybody watching this is asking themselves, like, yeah, why don't I act on more of those? Like I've had some really, really good ideas, but our tendency is to play it safe, like you said. Um, so we'd rather like deal with life being a five and play it safe because at least we know what the five is, as opposed to maybe taking that leap of faith into the unknown, which might have a ceiling of an 11. But as humans, we tend to play it safe for some reason. So I'm curious
Mhm.
to learn, like, what was it from these people who took that leap, and whether it was created an awesome business or wrote a book or wrote a play or traveled around the world on a sailboat for a year or whatever the case may be, like what caused them to do that? And then I think, how did that reshape the way you look at things?
Mhm.
'Cause I think those are stories everybody's going to be able to relate to. And my hope is the people that join us, not only the guests, but the people that listen, maybe draw some inspiration from those stories.
Yeah, I feel like as we dive into this, in a year from now, we're going to look back and there's going to be opportunities that happened that we would have never imagined. And we think this started out with a podcast talking about how people got their start and who knows where it might be. And one of the things that really encourages me about that is exactly that, that vision in a year from now, what could this look like? And in, take it even a little closer, 6 months, a few weeks from now. There's a Shinedown song, and one of the lyrics inside of it says, the first step is the one that really happens like with certainty, because by the time you're ready to take that first step, and its second step is the one full of possibility. And I love thinking about the way things get started in that vein. There was a recent research article, and the audience will soon know that we kind of take those as a grain of salt oftentimes, that a lot of the best research happens out on the sidewalk and out in life
You don't
outside
think
of a
you can
laboratory.
you can't believe all research, you mean?
So, well, I think a lot of it is, there's just a real life component that kind of gets lost in the laboratory. But this study was looking at what makes the happiest people. And while I don't think that the Invite podcast is all about this like happiness pursuit and discovery, what I found interesting was that a lot of people will say, they kind of at first glance think it's health, food, wealth, job title, the right house, the right vacations. It's having all of those things, but in fact, what the answer was is those who took risks are those who self-report being the happiest. Yet we know that on one hand, and then on the other side of kind of the way life plays out is like people tend to not take risks. It set aside the age, although I think a lot of people start this like reinvention at 40s and 50s. There's a lot of young people too that are kind of starting to maybe ask different questions about what their life can look
Mhm.
like and envision that. I believe that kind of right where we are right now in September of 2025, it's really hard to find good mentors. It's hard to find good people who are setting examples that other people might say, "Oh, I want to be like that." And maybe not that whole person, but maybe it's a character trait or a way someone carries themselves or holds themselves or creates themselves that someone says, "I want to be like that." So with the Invite podcast, how it differentiates itself from perhaps other ones, in my perspective, is that we're looking for kind of barstool stories, or and even if someone is like further along, trying to kind of trace back what got them to kind of mold their own path, try something new, break out of the way things have traditionally been done, and jump in. When I say that barstool moment, and this is something that I know will be a common theme that Troy and I talk about, is that we all kind of have these ideas that stop short because we envision what playing at Red Rocks is going to look like and having 14,000 people surround us in a beautiful auditorium, for example. And for those that don't know, Red Rocks is an amphitheater in Colorado that's open air and just a really great place to see a show, see the city, and meet and spend time with friends. But we sometimes forget that before anyone plays at Red Rocks, they were playing to their roommate in a bar by themselves. Maybe then that roommate turned into another roommate or their mom. But before we get to 14,000, there has to be these places where we just launch. A lot of the stories that are getting shared today are about that Red Rocks stage being that far along, and we're really curious, like, how did people even say yes to the most simple thing before they got to that big audience? So I know you have thoughts too about the Red Rocks moment.
Yeah, I do. I think that what you said is interesting in that a couple things. First, there's all kinds of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who seem to have this recalibration. And I'm sure since many generations ago, people have heard stories when they're younger of, you know, I thought I did everything right and I got to the finish line or what I thought was the finish line. And I realized I wasn't really all that fulfilled or all that happy. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, I feel like that story's been repeated for generations and generations. And it makes me wonder why, as young people, we decide that we need to go through this period of suck, for lack of a better word, before we can figure out that, oh, my dad was right, like, where my grandpa was right. Like, why do we continue to repeat that? And I think it's happened, as you pointed out, I think it's happened increasingly now. I think younger people are probably more skeptical of the blueprint that we were all fed, um, and probably asking more questions than generation prior. But still, there's tons of people out there pulling the trigger on spending, six figures on a college education and trying to follow the roadmap that everybody else has followed for 40, 50, 60 years. So that's curious to me. I don't know the answer to the question of why we continue to do the same thing when there seems to be plenty of evidence of people getting into their 40s and 50s and telling us, like, hey, like, think this through. Like, the path as you've been taught or recommended may not be the right one because I followed it and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Um, I think what you said about the Red Rocks moment is maybe one of the things that keeps people in that comfortable place and from accepting different invites and taking on a new challenge, in that we all kind of build a career, right? And maybe we're nothing against accountants, by the way, but let's just say you're an accountant and you build a career as an accountant and you get to a point in your early 30s where you're making good money, you're doing really well, but maybe you don't feel any kind of spark about the job. Like, you don't really like it, you don't love it, uh, yet maybe you're playing like maybe you're not playing Red Rocks as an accountant, but you're playing like a smaller amphitheater, and everybody wants to transition laterally. They want to they want to go over and they want to be a songwriter, but they want to start by playing in the amphitheater of 7,000. They're not willing to kind of take that step back and play, as you said, to a bar that's filled with maybe two of their buddies and their mom, right? Even though you know that in order to go up that different path, that's likely um, what's going to be expected and probably what it's going to take. And everybody's very uncomfortable because that means stepping into uh, basically a lifestyle that's probably super uncomfortable at that point because you're going to have to learn how to do without things that you currently have become accustomed to.
Mhm.
Um, that I think the other thing. that I was thinking about as you were talking is this idea of kind of happiness. And I think there's a societal definition for happiness. And unfortunately, I don't think that lays very well over what individuals find happiness in. Um, and that disconnect is interesting to me too. So I think it'll be really cool to hear from guests who maybe figured that out earlier on. And maybe that's what prompted them to uh, accept the invite, take the chance, and do something different. The other thing I think people enjoy about the podcast is that, you hear these stories about these people that, I was in corporate finance for 20 years and I was making great money. And I decided that I just didn't want to do that anymore. And I decided to leave all that behind. Well, I admire those people, but it's not nearly as difficult to leave all that behind when you've had a career for 20 years in corporate finance and you've probably got several $1,000,000 in the bank. That's one thing. I'm interested in hearing the stories about people that have like $200 in the bank and had decide to take that leap anyway. So I think a lot of the guests that we have, we'll probably have some people that are fairly familiar names, but we're probably going to have a lot of people that people aren't going to recognize immediately. But they have a story just the same. And I feel like a lot of times those people's stories might map over to how a lot of us feel better than a celebrity. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? I mean,
Mhm.
Matthew McConaughey, he's a super cool dude, but like, how much, how much does my moment have in common with Matthew McConaughey's? I don't know. Do I have
That's
more in
it. Yeah,
common
you'll
with
find
like the
out.
story of Joe the Butcher that opened his own butcher shop? Maybe. I have a feeling probably yes. So I think people enjoy that aspect of it. It's a mix of people from all different backgrounds, career paths, all that kind of thing, and I think that'll
Mhm.
bring some really cool perspective.
Yeah, to what you're just mentioning, I think that we have this tendency right now in the US, and I don't know that it's all that new either. But when we think about success, we just want to rubber stamp what someone else did. It's like, give me the recipe, give me the blueprint, give me the steps, give me the program, whatever it takes, like essentially the curriculum. And we're all brought up in school to think that. So it makes sense that we would think that. But what
Mhm,
I think the outcome over time of the Invite podcast will be that there's not going to be any blueprint here. While some people might walk through kind of the day to day that got them to where they are, and maybe they started out with $200 and now they have $200 million. That'll be a fascinating story in and of itself as well. But it will be fascinating to kind of sit back and start to hear and draw themes out of frameworks that people share that they did together, that maybe they didn't know each other when I say did together, but there's probably going to be themes that rise to the surface as we continue to have these conversations with, as you said, people from all walks of life. I'm interested in how someone who drives the bus for a band got started. I'm interested in hearing how someone decided to open a restaurant. That seems at surface level really risky to me, but people do it and people are doing it all the time and they're trying it, and then one restaurant turns into two, turns into an entire brand across the city. How did someone decide to plant one vine and eventually end up planting acres of them to pour wine in bottles for people all over the world? I think some of that is going to be really, really fascinating to dive into. But I kind of want to pivot off of that particular conversation around kind of the impetus behind it and ask you, like, you're starting. Yesterday, there wasn't an Invite podcast, and here in a few hours, there will be an Invite podcast published. This is something that we've talked about. We have little notes, whether it's electronic notes or post-it notes or even memories of conversations where we thought we would start a podcast together years ago. We never did. Now we are. Granted, I know the technology is a lot better and user friendly, which is helpful.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
but like, what? here we are on a September evening. What got you interested in taking that leap yourself?
I as I look around, and again, we live in the US, so I think a lot of what I might think is going on in the world might be conjecture, but I do think as I look around the US, I just feel this restlessness among people in that, if you grew up in the United States and you went through K through 12 in the United States, you were sold a certain bill of goods. Um, and I think it has fallen extremely flat for a very large number of those people. And I think that for me, it would be very rewarding that if something that we were a small part of um, became a catalyst for people to rethink all that and pursue things um, that maybe they have wanted to do, or maybe even they've felt like they've been called to do, uh, but they've ignored that, right? Like me personally, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe everybody has these callings. Um, Whether you choose to acknowledge them and follow them or not, that's a whole different story. But I feel like there's a large percentage of people, myself included, who have kind of followed this path that we were told from the time we were in, first grade, like do these things and your life will be successful, whatever that means. And, um, you're going to be happy, whatever that means. And I just don't think it's working for people. And I think that's why you see a massive amount of unrest in our country. I understand there's a big political divide and everything else, but my personal belief is I think that all stems from uh, a lack of joy and a lack of identity in individual people. And I think as a result of that, people look elsewhere for that. Um, so I guess my thing is like, hey, if you don't like this or you don't like that, like probably the best place in the it's to look in the mirror and start with yourself. And are you happy with yourself? Are you happy with what you're doing? Are you happy with how you spend your time, your days, all that kind of thing? And I think if people were honest with themselves, I think a lot of people would say no. And I think it's because we're fed this formula throughout school that tells us to do one thing, when in fact maybe we need to listen to our heart a little bit more and chase what we know deep down is probably what would make us happy, or at least bring us the most joy. So
Okay.
that's why I decided this would be a good idea. I hope it impacts people and helps people.
Yeah. Great answer.
How about you? Sorry, that was probably a little bit more than we wanted, but that's yeah. I hope people hear it, and I hope it sparks something in people.
Yeah. I think it's a great answer. It's your answer. And so I don't think there's anything to be apologetic for. Maybe it was the time of your answer, but your answer, your content was fantastic. And I don't think it was too long winded either. Uh,
Perfect.
Anyone who knows me that listens to this will know that that's my tendency is to talk way too much and answer relatively easy questions with a lot of words. So I guess how I would dive into that answer is somewhat similar to yours. I've had this restlessness about how do I want to make an impact in this world, and then my W-2 income is something that over my whole lifespan, like my whole life that I've had W-2 work, has been something where I meet some really, really incredible people. And I also have access to meet a lot of people. All that being said, it's like these are some really fabulous stories that are getting lost as people age out of the industry or whatever the other, what other reasons there might be. But those stories are just not getting captured. And I'm repeating myself a bit, we do a better job capturing the the glamorous part of the story, and sometimes not, like the really gritty, dirty, resilient, hard, what keeps someone up at night kind of tear story. And so it came a point where I was just, I had a regular Sunday. I don't remember exactly what we were doing. I know we were in the car, but I said to myself, I don't want another Sunday to be just the same Sunday that we had before. I want to do something with this nudge. Now, we certainly indulge and have a great time and take advantage of the time that we have together. So I'm not saying that, but like pushing this nudge aside that like there's something really fun out there. There's a way to connect with people in a meaningful way. I've always thought that that can't really be captured by a virtual method, and it needed to be something whether I mean, my ideal would be all of these happen around a dining table with great food and great wine and no schedule, with not only the people speaking, but the entire audience being there live and in person. That would, of course, be the dream. It, this can also achieve a lot of that desire and that calling. I believe that there's some really great content producers out there right now. I also am a little concerned that we're bombarded with so many different packets of this content. And I don't know that that's really the way the human mind is supposed to operate from all those different platforms, all those different streams. But long form content is starting to kind of find its spot in the world, whether it's a
Mhm.
3-hour show. I don't know that ours are going to run up to that, but people are interested in something that does have a little bit of sticky power, and they can listen to it on their commute or at home or while working out. And I think this is a special option for other people. And then one just like kind of little caveat to all of this is when I was looking at who's hosting podcasts and who is on the podcast, I kind of counted myself out of ever being a podcast host because I just thought I didn't have the right credentials or experience or expertise. And I think that there's great people out there hosting podcasts right now who have demonstrated that you can start with some technology, some software, maybe some hardware and time and passion and make something really neat out of it. So while there's not very many women who do podcasts as a host, I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of cool because maybe I could offer something that would inspire someone else to take a jump into a field that they don't really have many role models in.
Yeah, I think that's great. And why do you think it there were a couple things you said, and I know we probably want to wrap up here before too long, but you mentioned W-2 work, and I was talking earlier about how people tend to look elsewhere because my belief is like they're just not really happy with themselves. And I feel like W-2 work is one of those areas where I feel like people today look to their vocation, their W-2 job, so to speak, to fill all these different buckets that might be lacking. I think there's really two primary areas people look to fill buckets that are lacking in themselves. And I feel like your vocation or your employer is one of them. Uh, and your romantic partner, whatever that looks like, is the other. Now, not coincidentally, I think in both those realms, you see a massive failure rate. Both people are unhappy in their jobs. I think we were reading a study not that long ago that said what, like 70% of people are planning on leaving their jobs in the next year and are unhappy with it. And something like 60, I think it was 62% are actively seeking another job while they're in their current job. Uh, we all know the numbers around divorce statistics. They're not good. I suppose there's a little bit of variance as far as the actual percentage, but in any case, more people get divorced than stay married. Um, and it just kind of makes me wonder, like, when you talk about your W-2 job, I mean, what are your expectations for what a W-2 job provides for you? And what do you think the societal norm in that category is?
So I'll start with the first answer. What does W-2 work mean for me? I would say that as I work inside of W-2 roles, my goal is to always give it my best. While I'm there for the company and the work that I'm doing and the customers that I'm servicing, it's to ultimately be the best I can be for their needs. I don't find that that company needs to be the best for my needs. I think there needs to there's certainly there's some fundamental things that need to happen. You can't be abused, you can't be, I mean, there's a obvious,
Sure.
like the pretty obvious things. But as far as what, say, like the brass tacks of what I think W-2 income is that it gives me the ability to have a lifestyle I want, from a house, vehicle, food, recreational time. And in this case, it gives me the flexibility to have a evening once a week to work through a podcast and put that out. It gives me kind of that after hours flexibility, and I'm really grateful for that. But outside of even myself, like, what do I want out of W-2 income? I just think it's really important that maybe people take a step back and look into what are they expecting their employer to provide, and then for the employer to also say the same thing, like, what is our expectation to return to our employees? And I notice every company does that a little differently and answers that question a little differently,
Mm.
and that's a good thing. But, as far as, like, W-2 income goes, I think that it's something that not all of the eggs of happiness need to fall into, but that and divorce future, like, all of those things are probably, like, a little out of the scope of the About the Invite podcast, but I do think that it's something that W-2 income doesn't necessarily need to own my happiness, that's my responsibility.
Fair enough. I would imagine that as we start talking with more and more guests, we'll hear quite a bit about their W-2 experience and where they were at. And I know from personal stories that I've heard from personal friends that a lot of times the lack of that spark in their W-2 work is actually one of the instigators in them kind of propelling themselves to follow something different. So it'll be
Mhm.
interesting to see how that plays out. Um, well, I tell you what, I think we've kind of given people an idea of what the podcast is all about. So we should probably bring this initial episode home. Um, why don't we tell everybody, or maybe you can tell them, like, how often are we planning on recording these, and where can people find us?
Okay, well, the intent is that this will be a weekly show brought in with a variety of different guests that will let you know in advance who do we anticipate. It's on all major platforms. Also, check it out on YouTube. But if you can't watch the video of it, hopefully you can at least join for the audio. That'll get it for tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate your time. We'll talk to y'all soon.
So, one thing that we have to mention is that, as Troy was saying earlier, 70% of people are disengaged in as employees. Those are the same people that are working for you. So if you're interested in diving into figuring out how you can adjust the hiring process all the way to the culture with a real strong focus on the niche training to your specific business, then check out the company Skill Squatch. We are proud to have Skill Squatch as a sponsor of our podcast, and we look forward to hearing more about what they offer as well. Secondly, we are also grateful for the sponsorship of 11 Ventures, who seeks to transform the way people gather at conferences, at shows, and at other industry events. We've all been to so many keynotes, and I can't tell you how many I've been to, but I also can't tell you how many I remember. And so the idea behind really bringing people together and connecting them is the principle that 11 Ventures is built upon. 11 Ventures brings in different experiences for large groups, small groups, really a group of any size, to help really drive connection. If you're interested in that, check out 11ventures.co. The word 11 is spelled out.